In this video, I'll cover the nature and value of the customer experience. I'll discuss the various types of experiences that marketers seem to be enamored with these days, why experience matters, what's involved in the customer experience, how we improve experiences, a little about customer satisfaction, and then what we might consider beyond the customer experience. So let's start with all of these X's, these experiences. And I say X's because we really seem to be enamored these days in marketing with all of the, adding the X after a letter to talk about this experience. And, UI, UX, PX, CX, EX, BX, and there are plenty more that people are talking about these days. But we'll focus on these. Let's start with UI, or the user interface, and the associated user experience. Now, this pretty much started over in information systems, where people would talk about the user interface, where you were actually interfacing with either a digital program, some type of computer program, or with a web page, and what that experience was like. So it might have been someone in a business that was actually using some type of a computer system, and then they had this user interface so that they could use it fairly easily because they weren't programmers, and then that employee perhaps had a certain experience. And so we would call it the user experience rather than the customer experience, because it really was whoever's going to use that program. Or perhaps it was something when we got online and we started to look at web pages and think about how that web page worked and how people could navigate that. And then we were talking about the user and how that user experienced that. Eventually then, we talked as well about product experience. Now, product experience really was talked about long before this concept of user interface and user experience. It's just we didn't call it that all the time. And we talked about how good the product was and product quality, but also marketers at that point still did understand that it wasn't just the product itself, but it was how that product was used that made the difference. Finally, we got to this point where we really focused in on this idea of CX, or the customer experience. And we understood that the customer experience really was, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, what it entails, but the customer experience meant that it wasn't just the product, but it was also the services that went along with the purchase of that product, and the servicing of the product after it was purchased. And there was a lot more that went into all of this. We also talk about employee experience, and this is also critical, and especially nowadays when we're considering that we have all of these customers who become very heated, and they hold on to their smartphones, and as they walk up to the counter, it's almost like they're filming this, waiting for the employee to say something that they don't like, and then to argue with them, and then put it on social media. So the employee experience really is becoming something very important to marketers, because if your employees don't have a good experience, then they're not going to be able to do a good job. And especially frontline employees that are meeting with the customers, they will, if they can't do their job well, then most likely sales will go down and customers will leave and go elsewhere. There's talk as well about the brand experience. Now, I appreciate this concept of the brand experience, but I don't necessarily agree that you'll see some authors out there will talk about the brand experience and they'll say that that encompasses the customer experience. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that the brand experience really is something different, that the brand experience, or the customer's experience with the brand, may be part of the customer experience instead of the customer experience being part of the brand experience. But you can kind of look at it from different perspectives. And I think sometimes those perspectives will bring out different ideas when you're trying to find a way to market your product better. A lot of times when we talk about these different types of scenarios or perspectives, or we're getting to this point where you want to think about it a little bit. It's like the 4 Ps versus the 4 Cs versus a distribution approach to marketing exchange. It's not to say that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. It's just that by thinking about it in a different way, you can now think a little bit differently about what you're doing as a marketer, and that will help you. So what do we do about all this? If we have all these experiences, what can we do to make things better? Well, the first is product design. We know that whatever our product is, whether it's a good or a service or information, entertainment, whatever it is, that better product design usually will result in a better product experience, which will usually result in better customer experience. service design as well. So if you have a good, physical product, then you also have to make sure that all of the services that come before, during, and after the acquisition of that product are designed in a way that helps you to facilitate that exchange in that mutually beneficial manner. And then we also can look now, when we're talking about these experiences, at experience design. And this means that instead of just looking at product or looking at service, that we truly are trying to build an experience. Now, this isn't necessarily like, Disney and they have their experience that they care about, or any theme park or any one that's really selling an experience. But every time we're selling something, whether it's walking into our store or selling a particular product online, we really should be trying to make that experience as good as possible. And while we're working on product design, while we're working on service design, we might as well try to look at the experience design, and that will help us to try to build an experience that's very positive, that will keep our customers coming back over and over. So when we talk all about customer experience, we probably should have an idea of who the customer is. And so typically we're talking about the user or the consumer, right? This end user, and that's our customer. But we know that the user or consumer isn't always the person who is the buyer, the one that's making the purchase. So that buyer may go to the store, buy the product, bring it home, and then someone else at the house uses it. Or in a business setting, one person buys the supplies or buys other, the computer equipment, but then someone else might be using that. The same thing happens with the payer. In other words, whether it's the person paying in the store, or maybe it's a third party, an insurance or an organization that's making that payment, and whoever is doing the paying also is a customer and someone we need to consider. Then become the recommenders, the ones that recommend the product to others, and of course nowadays the influencers. And the recommender or influencer doesn't necessarily have to use the product or try the product. It could be that they're either paid, or they might have heard about the product and then they mention it to someone else. And so even though they may not be buying the product, because they are recommending or influencing, then it's up to us as the marketers to consider them our customer as well. Then there's the users or consumers others. And by this, what I mean is this could be friends or family or people you see in the store. In other words, if you're going to buy a really expensive watch, then you want the other people who see you, whether it's family or friends or coworkers or just the people on the street, most likely if you're buying it for prestige, then you may want to flash it a few times, and you want those others to kind of see this. And so it's important for us as marketers to market to the others so that the others can support the actual user or consumer in buying the product and in having, and part of that is making up a positive customer experience. Our next will be the authorities, and by this I mean the government, the regulatory agencies. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing as far as what we're selling has the proper safety and has a proper, that we've gone through the proper channels to make sure that we can sell what we're trying to sell, and we satisfy those groups. If we don't satisfy the government and for some reason we're doing something that's against the law or against the regulations, then that could shut us down, and of course then we're going to lose business. There's also the self-imposed authorities, and these are kind of the watchdogs. These are the groups out there who might, or even individuals who might come up and say, hey, we don't think that what you're doing is using the right packaging. You're using too much packaging, or you're not, taking care of your employees, or whatever it is that they're going to say. We've got to understand that even if they never purchase from us, we've got to make sure that we consider them in that customer experience, because they've got to be happy so that they're not going to come after us and make us have to go through a lot of changes all the time. So now that we have this idea of who our customers might be, let's talk about this idea of experience and why does experience matter. And the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of reality versus perception. And that is that it's not your reality that matters, but that of your customers. In other words, what's real, what's really happening, the actual all of the product that you have, the fact that your product is technically the best or has a certain level of quality won't really matter if your consumer, your buyer, your customer doesn't perceive it that way. So say, for example, that you have a smartphone that has some features, but you don't know that those features are there. So you think you don't have them, you're dissatisfied, and then later on you find out that they have those features, and now you're more satisfied. But what if you never found out? And because you were dissatisfied, you went ahead and you bought another cell phone or went into another brand because of that. The idea here is that it's not that what the truth is necessarily, but it's that truth according to the customer. In other words, that reality is really going to make a big difference. Let's talk about the present versus memories of the past. The present, that moment that you're with your customers, that you're having that experience and you feel really good about it, or maybe it's something bad, but it's good. Whatever it happens to be, that is not what's going to matter in the end. In the end, what will matter is how that customer remembers that experience. So it may be that, you go on a cruise and there's some problems that you have there, but if there's enough really positive experiences, then hopefully a year from now or 2 years from now, maybe you'll kind of forget about those negative ones. Maybe not completely forget, but you might not think about them as much, and you might feel pretty good about that cruise enough to go ahead and schedule another cruise in the future. So remember, it's not what's happening or what happened, but what your customers remember about what happened. It's what their memory is. And here's where we bring in a lot of psychology and talk about memory biases. And these are just types of cognitive biases that bias memories. And there's a reading that you can read about this, but there's a lot out there that talk about this. And there's an opportunity for marketers, not necessarily to try to manipulate their customers, but at the very least to understand what these biases are and to either use them in their persuasion process or to be careful that the biases don't bias negatively, because you don't want to have something where maybe you did stay at a hotel or on a cruise or somewhere and there were a couple bad experiences. You don't want those bad experiences to take over all of the memories of that experience, that overall experience. You want to make sure that they are put in their place. In other words, you don't want to forget about them. You're not going to try to convince the buyer or the consumer to forget about it completely, but you'd like to put them in perspective. In other words, yes, there was one bad day where the toilet wasn't working, but the rest of your 14-day cruise was fantastic. So let's kind of put that in perspective, that there was a little bit of a bad day, but there were 13 great days. The other aspect I want to consider is facts versus feelings. And it always reminds me of this quote: they may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And yes, this is a guy named Carl Buehner in 1971 who said this, and I know it's been attributed to other people, but if you actually look at Quote Investigator, I'm really kind of a stickler when it comes to quotes. They kind of explain how that all happened, how other people got, several different people actually have been attributed to this quote. But it's something that people say all the time anyway, and it's something that you should know, and that is that how the people feel really matters. And so even if the bathroom was bad, even if something else happened with your customers, it's how they feel. So you might have said, hey, the facts are that we serviced you and took care of you and took care of all these things, that the product worked exactly as it was supposed to work. You can say that as much as you want, and those could be the facts. But it's their feelings that matter. So just like those memories of the past, the memories matter, the feelings matter, that perception matters. And then the last thing I want to mention is affect transfer. So affect transfer is something we talk about, and we can talk about it in terms of affect transfer from an advertisement to the brand. It can be from a product or experience to the brand. But the idea of affect transfer is that the brand, in a sense, becomes alive with meaning. That now you start to think of the brand as more than just a label on a product, but you start to like that brand and care about that brand. And because you have that affect transfer, that means that the brand actually gains a little bit of social capital. And with that social capital, just like in a relationship, if you've got the person, in a relationship, the other person has a lot of social capital, they can make a mistake. And even when they make that mistake, you're okay with that. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, you've always been really good to me, so that's fine. And so, and that affect transfer can be positive or it can be negative. So for example, I like Marriott hotels. I go there. It's a really great place. Everything's fine. And I have a friend who just, for whatever reason, doesn't like them. So whenever we would have a conference and the conference was at the Marriott, he would walk around and he would notice all the bad things because he already had a negative attitude toward that particular brand. So let's think about what our customer experience involves. And let's talk about a physical product in this particular case. And so we know that, first of all, it does involve the physical product itself. And that's things like the functionality and the durability and what it looks like and even frivolous features. There might be little things on your product that really aren't needed or aren't necessary, but they might add to your experience and add to your enjoyment of that particular product. And sometimes I think about the Mac computers that have the Apple logo on the back of it that lights up. And I mean, that's it's not necessary at all. It's not a necessity. It's a frivolous feature to some degree, but it's nice and it's fun and people like it. And so we have to think not only that the product works, but the product works in a way that makes people feel good. Also involved in our customer experience is our use of the physical product. And this could last for moments, just a very quick moment where someone lights off a firecracker or something, and that's it. It's the moment's over. It's done. Or it could be years of driving a particular car or using a bicycle or having some furniture. And so as we think about customer experience, we have to think, well, what's that use of that physical product going to be? Then there are the services that surround our acquisition of the product. And this is and when you think about this, it's not just the services, but also the communications about that product. And so the services part of it, I'll just back that up there. The services part are everything that happens as we're buying, before we're buying, after we're buying, making sure that if we have a problem, 4 years later, then we've got someone there at the helpline that can help us. And then the communication about the product is beyond just the services, just all those communications. And so all the communications before we acquire the product, and that could be ads or word of mouth talking about the product. It could be during the acquisition, the sales pitches, the purchasing, anything that goes on there. During the usage, so maybe training or recalls or reinforcements. And then finally post-usage, which is really involved with those memory biases and how they might be influenced. So when you think about something during usage and training, I remember, years ago putting together a big computer desk, and it was one of those ones kind of like the IKEA thing where, you have to get it in the box, you have to put it together. It wasn't IKEA, but something similar. And I remember putting it together, and I got to this one point where they had actually given me the wrong piece. And I knew that because there were no holes in this one side. And as I looked at it, I thought, well, I can't believe they haven't done this the right way. Everything else seemed to be really good. It's a good company. So I called up their toll-free number and talked to their customer service. And I said, listen, apparently you gave me the wrong piece. Could you ship out the new piece? And the lady on the phone was really nice. And she said, yeah, let me just make sure I know what you're looking at there. And she said, okay, is there a logo right there? A little, thing on the front of it and, near the bottom. And I said, yes, there is. And she goes, okay, sir, you've put the piece on the wrong way. And so it wasn't really that they gave me the wrong piece. I just did it wrong. But they helped me through this by training me. And that's why things like instructions are so important. In fact, just recently I was helping a friend put together some tables and desks that were from IKEA. And it was interesting because IKEA apparently doesn't want to give us any instructions with words on them, and all they have are these pictures. And it was kind of a bizarre thing because as I was looking at the pictures, I couldn't really even understand quite what the pictures meant. And eventually, after a while, I realized that something that looked like a bird was really a hammer, and they were saying not to hammer something. And I thought it meant don't, throw the bird on the floor, and what they meant was don't hammer this on the floor because it could break your floor. It would be nice if that that training, that manual, that little tiny instruction sheet could have said something more. But then, of course, they'd have to translate it into a bunch of different languages or have different language versions of it, and that might be difficult for them, and they may feel that this is enough to do this. It also could mean that I'm just not very good at putting together these things. Let's talk about another aspect of the customer experience, and that is our comparison criteria. And this is comparisons against other products that we've experienced, other customer experiences that we've had, and even against other people's customer experiences. That maybe we're having an experience, and so I have a daughter who had a baby recently, and so she was talking about this experience that she had at the hospital, and then someone else started talking to her, and she started talking about her experience she had at another hospital. And because of that experience at the other hospital, which my daughter didn't go to, didn't want to go to, anything else, it was still a comparison criteria, a set of comparison criteria that now affected her customer experience because she knew about someone else's customer experience, even though it was with a different brand. Also, we have our expectation criteria. What did we think would happen when we went to this event, or when we received this service, or when we purchased this particular product? What did we think? What were our expectations? And our expectations, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, have a really, really big effect on our satisfaction and on our customer experience. And then finally, beyond just our expectation criteria, are our own desires. What did we want to have happen? So we might have a scenario where we had a service or an experience, and we say, well, it was better than expected, but it wasn't what I hoped for. So I was expecting it to not be very good, and it was a little bit better, but I was really hoping it would be fantastic. Kind of like any of you people that are, investing in cryptocurrency or something, maybe it was a little bit better than you expected, at least at one point, but perhaps it wasn't what you hoped for. So let's talk about how do we improve the products that we're trying to sell, whether that's a good service, information, entertainment, locations, personalities, whatever it is we're trying to sell. How do we improve those? And we can think in terms of a physical product again, just to make it easy. First of all, we know we can do product research. And so this is a matter of looking pre-design, what type of a product are we going to make, doing usability testing when we have prototypes, and then even post-use and really trying to understand, have we done enough research to understand, is this product good and how can we make it better? There's also trial and error. Maybe we just see what works and what doesn't work. And we examine that, and if it works, then we're happy with it. And if it doesn't work, then we get rid of it. Then there's always the customer feedback, and this really is where we're really going to be able to get a lot from this. And again, it's not just the user or the consumer, but it could be the shopper, the person who's paying, etc., and understanding their feedback. And this could be through formal surveys, it could be through reviews, whether they're on paper or online. We may not trust those all the time. It could be through social media. And again, we may not trust all of that because we realize that people could be trying to manipulate the attitude toward our brand or toward our product through social media and through false reviews. It could be customer service and through either a phone or email or chat, where we get to listen to the concerns that people have. And usually they'll be calling those when they have concerns, not necessarily to tell us we've done such a great job. It can be through observation, which is actually really good. And so observation of actions, of usage. And of course, we could observe in person. We could be in a restaurant, and maybe the owner of the restaurant kind of stands over there in the corner and takes a look out there when people receive their food, and takes a look at their faces and thinks, wow, they look a little bit disappointed, or they don't look thrilled. And I want them to look thrilled. And so that owner goes back in and talks to the chef and says, could you please make your dishes look more thrilling? Because I want people to be excited when they walk in and see that. And it always reminds me of going to Havana Harry's in Miami, which is a restaurant that has really, really, big serving sizes. And the first time I was there and I ordered something and saw how big it was, and I'm sure my eyes got really big. And the same goes with their desserts. And so there's something about that observation where if they can see it happen, now they get information from that. And of course, digitally as well, we know how much time someone spends on a web page and where they click and where they go. And that can help us understand if we can improve that product or part of that product or that service. And then, of course, frontline personnel, the salespeople, the customer service people, all the people out there that are going to deal with the customers and the shoppers, they will be a great source of information for us. We can also improve products by looking at competitors and these competing products and what the competitors are doing. And we look and we think, well, it seems to be working for them. Maybe we can incorporate some of their features into our product. And just as a note, one of the things that will help you the most in improving products is to really develop empathy for your customers. The more you empathize with your customers and understand what it is that they want, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes again, the more you empathize with them, the more likely you can think of things in your product and service design that would be helpful for them and that they would like. So a little more on how we improve products. After gathering all this knowledge, then what do? Well, we can focus on product improvements. We try to make the product better. We can also focus on process improvement. In other words, I can make my product better. I can improve the processes of making my product better so I have fewer defects and less waste. And these should be terms that you recognize if you've been working on your Lean Six Sigma certification. And we can also work on process improvement that will help us with our service end of the product offering. In other words, making sure that not necessarily that each customer gets the same process, because not every customer is going to want the same process. Not every customer wants to be led through the buying process in the same way. But there has to be something in that process where people may have a little bit of flexibility, but there is to some degree a certain level of consistency. And whenever I think about product improvement, then I think about places like McDonald's, where they really are good at making sure that the products are the right products for their target audiences. It may not be the right product for you or for me, but it's the right product for their target audience. And their processes help them to keep those products consistent. Now, when we're trying to improve products, we can add features, we can change features, we can delete features, but we can also communicate about features. We can train people and we can compare these with others, and we can connect emotionally with the people that are purchasing and shopping, and we can persuade. So that communication really does go a long way. It may not be that we have to change our product. It may be that we have to change the communication about the product so that people will appreciate it more, or that people will be able to use it better, or that they'll feel more connected emotionally to us, and then they'll be willing perhaps to have a product that's not so great, perhaps, or at least isn't so amazing. So we can improve products, but what about improving experiences? And so to do this, we can apply the concepts of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, and delight, which we're going to be covering in just, I think, the next slide, or 2 slides away at least. And so we can do that. We can improve the experience by talking about satisfaction and dissatisfaction. We can explore what constitutes a customer experience, which we've just done, and we can improve processes that produce experiences. In other words, let's look at the different types of processes we have in our organization, in the customer interface, in the in anything that deals with that customer in that customer's journey, and let's try to improve those processes that produce the experiences. And again, this is a different way to think about it. And if you think about this, you could end up having this job where your job is to go through and just improve processes wherever you go. You talk to customers, you watch them, you experience what they're experiencing, and you try to find ways to improve that process. When I say improve the process, I don't just mean from the customer side, I also mean from the employee side and also the company side. In other words, an improved process should be effective In other words, it does what it's supposed to be doing, but it should also be efficient. And again, that's where this Six Sigma really comes into play. The more you understand that and the more you can work that, the more you should be able to have lean processes that still produce very positive experiences. Well, another few steps we can look at is to know our customers, really to understand them. What is it that they want? What do they like? What makes them happy? What helps them reach their goals? What do they fear? The more we know about our customer, the more we can serve our customer. And the more we can know about them, we can do this by communicating with them. The more communication we have, the more we'll be able to know what they're thinking and how they're feeling. Also, it's important to empathize with our customers. And the more we communicate, to know them and try to empathize, and then the more we're going to care about them. And I remember when I was a teenager and I was with the service group, and we would sometimes go and play basketball in the evenings or whatever else. But then I remember one evening they said, oh, tonight we're going to actually go and we're going to, all help paint this elderly lady's house. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. Let's go play basketball. It's like, we don't want to go paint some lady's house. I mean, that sounds boring and it's work and it just sounds terrible. We don't know who she is. We don't care who she is. But we went and followed what our leaders told us to do, and we went there and we started painting the house. And after a while of serving her, of doing this service for her, we started to actually feel emotion toward her. And it's a very big truth that the more you serve someone, the more you'll care about them, the more that you'll have positive affect, positive feelings toward them. And by the time we were done, we really cared about this older lady. We cared about her, and we were excited about painting her house. And even though we had missed playing basketball, we had gone back right to our leaders and said, wow, that was great. We had a great feeling about it. We wanted to do it again. So we can improve these customer experiences by caring enough about our customers and empathizing with them through communication and knowing them, so that we can now start to really think like them and think, what could I do to make this experience better for them? Again, knowing that all our customers are different, but at some point we've got to find some type of a process that will work for the majority of our customers with a little bit of room for customization. So we want our customers to be satisfied. So let's talk about dissatisfaction, satisfaction, and something that Kotler called many years ago, Philip Kotler called delight. And so let's take an analytical view of satisfaction, and that it's a function of performance and expectations. And there's all sorts of other things we can add in here. So let's think about that when performance equals expectation, in other words, I expected something and it happened, I should be satisfied. I should be happy about that. When performance is less than expectations, in other words, I expected something to be pretty good and it turns out it's not that good, then I should be dissatisfied. And then when performance is better than expectation, this is what many marketers nowadays call delight. I don't necessarily like the word, but marketers use this. And again, I think Philip Kotler had a lot to do with this. So when we think about that, then let's think about a scenario where someone, has the performance of a product, of the use of the service, it could even just be, what the performance was of watching a movie. And you rate that as a 7. So we say, well, that's pretty good, but that's not so good. A 7 rating, you know what? Here at our business, we like to have 10, 10, 10. We have to have 9.5 or 10. Well, you know what? If all they were expecting was a 7, and then it turned out to be that they rated it as a 7, well, maybe that's good enough. That they don't have to worry about doing anything else, because that 7 minus 7 is that 0, and they're satisfied, okay? They're satisfied with that. So if they expected a 9, got a 9, then they're satisfied. Expected a 5 and got a 5, they're satisfied. And we should be pretty happy with that as well, because why we want to go out there and do more, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So let's look at another option here, and that is we have two different people, A and B. And both of them also rated the performance of this product or service or entertainment or whatever it was, rated it as a 7. So normally we'd say, well, they both rated it as a 7, so they're equally happy, they're equally satisfied. But what if we find out that person A walked in the door expecting it to only be a 5? My friends told me this movie is like a 5. It's like so-so. If you have time, extra time, go see it. But if not, I wouldn't bother. But, I saw the movie and it turned out it was a 7. So, I'm delighted. I'm delighted about that. But the other person, they rated it a 7, but they had expected it to be a 9. Their friends had told them it's an amazing movie. And they walked in and they were like, it wasn't that amazing. And so in this case, there should be dissatisfaction because I had one expectation and my performance came in under that expectation. The other person A, should be more or less delighted. I only expected a 5, but I got a 7. I got more than what I was expecting. Well, let's look at another scenario then. So in this case, it should be that A is more satisfied than B. Let's look at another scenario where we look at, people C and D. And so in this case, we have a very big difference in the performance rating. So C said, no, this product was a 9 after I used it. But person D said, it was only a 3. But let's say that their expectations were 7 and 1 respectively, which would mean then that their satisfaction or dissatisfaction, their delight in this case, should be a 2. But we have to be careful here. So in this particular case, saying that 9 minus 7 is, even though it's 2, that performance of 9 is pretty amazing. That expectation is still pretty high versus an expectation of only a 1. That's like, my gosh, it's like it would have been horrific. And the performance, though, was just bad. I expected horrific, I got bad. Okay, maybe I don't know if you could even call that satisfaction. And so this is where the concern is when people start to kind of make this numerical. But the concept at least works in the sense that we can say with A and B, at the very least, we can say there was a comparison point that was similar. In other words, we had that 7 versus 7 in the performance. Or for example, if we had a 7 versus 7 in the expectation, yet one found it to be a 5 and one found it to be a 9, then we would have that similarity that could tell us we can make that comparison better. But between C and D, there is no similarity between the 9 and the 3 or the 7 and the 1. So saying that those two people are equally delighted, I think would be a terrible mistake. So we have to be careful if you're using this type of a way to look at it, then be wary of making that comparison when you don't have something that has that similarity. So with satisfaction and dissatisfaction and delight, the question is, how far do we go? How far do we take our customers? Is this going to be the kind of thing where our clerk, when the people walk in, our clerk says, well, welcome to our store. It's like, would you like to be satisfied or delighted? And so maybe we let the customer choose. Maybe the customer wants to just be satisfied all the time and doesn't really care about being delighted. And in other cases, they might want to be delighted. So let's talk about the satisfaction versus delight. So Philip Kotler, and I put the source of this quote, is quoted as saying, "It is no longer enough to satisfy your customers, you must delight them." Well, this is kind of an interesting thing. And so let me talk about some experiences that I've had personally. And so the first one was an experience at a restaurant out in Las Vegas, at Jack in the Box. And I used to work at that restaurant when I was like 16, 17, and 18 years old. And I was probably 16 when I was first working there. And I was putting some fries into the little bag. And as I took the little scoop and put the fries in, I noticed that the timer for the fries was almost up. And when the timer was up on the fries, that meant we took all the fries that were in the bin and we threw them into the trash because they were too old. And our manager was really adamant about that. Do not use the old fries because people will not be happy because they'll be greasy, they'll be soggy, they won't really be very crispy or good. So I thought, well, we're about to throw away the fries. So as I took my scoop and I scooped up the fries, I put a lot of fries into that bag because I kind of felt like, well, we're going to waste them anyway. We might as well give them to somebody and that person will be happy. And so I really stuffed those fries into that little bag. And then the manager came over, and as he walked over, he looks at it and he sees it sitting in the rack that's, where it's waiting for the person to take it and put it in the bag to take it to the customer. And the manager asked me, "What is this?" And I said, "Well, it's some fries, a bag of fries." And he goes, "What size bag of fries is it?" And I said, "Well, it's a small fry." He goes, "How much does a small fry weigh?" And I go, "Well, it's 3 ounces." And he goes, "Does that weigh 3 ounces?" I'm like, "Well, no. I mean, but I just thought that since we have these extra fries and we're going to throw them away, we might as well just give them to the customer." So he proceeds to pick the fries out one at a time, tossing them back into the tray where he knows we'll be throwing them away. And then after he's picked out enough, he picks up the bag, carefully sets it onto the scale where it's exactly 3 ounces. This guy knew his fries well. And then he took this 3-ounce bag of fries, which by that point I looked at it and it looked just completely empty. I mean, it looked just like the saddest, small fry I'd ever seen in my life. And he took that small little fry and he tosses it in the bag, for the customer. And that was it. And at the time, I thought, this is terrible that this guy's doing this. I mean, we had a chance to give someone something extra. But think, why was it that he wanted to make sure that that small fry was always 3 ounces and not Anthony's 5.5-ounce version? And the answer is because if the people got those French fries and they had a lot, let's say it was their first time going to Jack in the Box, then they might expect that a small fry is supposed to have all that in there. And they wouldn't know. And then the next time they go, they'd be unhappy because their expectation would be, I'll have a lot of fries, and then the reality later on would be that they wouldn't have that. And so even if it was a person who had come to Jack in the Box quite a bit, a regular customer, they might get all those fries and still feel like, wow, I have all these fries. They must have changed it. Next time I come, I want to make sure I get a lot of fries as well. So that's one experience. The other experience is, I'll give you a comparison between the Taco Bell 7-layer burritos and the pickleless McDonald's burger. Well, when I used to go to Taco Bell a lot, and so I haven't been there since the pandemic started, but I love 7-layer burritos. And I would go, and sometimes I would have this really, really huge 7-layer burrito, and sometimes it seemed like I had this burrito that, was just tiny, and it almost seemed like they gave me the wrong thing until I bit into it to see, and it's like, oh, it is a 7-layer burrito, but it's so small. Well, that variation causes me to sometimes be happy and sometimes be unhappy with Taco Bell, and it depended on which Taco Bell I went to, who was making it. Sometimes even the same person was making it, and it's just, maybe they didn't have enough ingredients, I don't know what, but sometimes they were big, sometimes they were small. I compare that to McDonald's, where McDonald's really does have a good process, and they're very strict about making sure that their products are always the same across stores. If you go to a McDonald's in California or a McDonald's in New York, then those products should be the same. Well, I remember one time going with my daughters, my young daughters, and they were pretty small, and we bought a bunch of regular hamburgers. And one of my daughters never liked the pickle on the hamburger, so she would always open up her hamburger and then take the pickle and put it on her sister's burger. Well, right as she was starting to do that, their sister was opening up her burger at the same time, her bun, so she could, they could take the pickle and put it from one to the other. And the first daughter had said, "Whoa, there's no pickle." And I thought, well, that's weird. I mean, maybe they got rid of the pickle or something, because my second daughter said, well, there's none on mine either. And I started to think, well, wow, McDonald's has changed their burger and taken the pickle off? So being the curious marketer that I am, I called up McDonald's and I asked them, and I said, hey, listen, I called up that location and said, hey, there were no pickles on the burger. Have you guys changed the burgers? And they said, no, actually. And they seemed a little bit embarrassed. And the answer was that we had ran out of pickles, is what they said. And that's a huge no-no in McDonald's world, because you're supposed to always have the process and make it work. And I know that when I was back in the day, when I was 16 working at Jack in the Box, if we ran out of pickles, we would just go to the store nearby and buy a jar of pickles and use them. But for McDonald's, you're not supposed to be doing that. And so for various reasons. So it was a very odd thing to have the pickleless McDonald's burger, because normally they were very consistent with their product. Whereas with Taco Bell, there was massive inconsistency. Why is it that we want to make sure we have this consistency? Well, the problem with delighting the customers is that it can move expectations too high. And so In fact, the person who I first saw that said this was also Philip Kotler. So I don't know really if that first quote is real, because it makes me wonder, why would he say that when he knows there's a problem? If you delight your customers and you just do this and then you do it again and do it again, every time you do it, you have to move a little bit higher because their expectation has changed as you start to delight them. And I remember one time calling up the phone company, and the person answered the phone, such and such phone company. It's my pleasure to talk with you today. It's my goal to exceed your expectations. And I thought, wow, that's a really bad goal, because if you exceed my expectations, then the next time my expectations will already be higher, and the next person has to even go higher to exceed those expectations. What they really want to do is meet those expectations and get the satisfaction and not the delight. So what do we do here? We manage performance, right? We manage the goods and services and experience, but we also focus in on managing expectations. So in other words, we want to make sure we want to set the expectations high enough that they'll buy the product, but not so high that if the product isn't amazing, that they're then going to be disappointed. But we also have to manage those hopes and desires. In other words, not just what you expect, but also what you hope or desire. We don't want you to hope for something too good, because if we can't deliver it, you're going to be unhappy. And also, of course, as we're always going to have, manage the process. That's the key, is to make sure that the process is a good, solid process that gives you both performance, right? It gives you the outcome, it gives you the effectiveness, but it's also going to give you efficiencies and consistencies. So let's go back to the scenario we had before, where the family is coming in. Maybe now we can think of this a different way. Maybe what we say now is, welcome to our store, where we'd like to satisfy you, but not delight you. Just a thought. Let's talk about going beyond the customer experience. We know right now that we have to manage our performance, right? We have to manage the goods and services and experience. We have to manage the expectations and also the hopes and desires. We have to manage the processes, and we have to manage the experiences. But in addition to this, we know that we have to manage those perceptions, because remember, it's not the reality, it's the perceptions. And it's not just the perceptions, but it's also the memories. So we have to manage those memories of what happened, a year ago or even a few weeks ago, and manage that. But a positive customer experience only gets us so far. At some point, we really need to manage customer value. So it's not just that they had a positive experience, but they have to feel some type of value. And value, typically, of course, we think of that as a function between benefits and costs. And we have to have higher benefits than costs. However, when we really think about this, it's not just more benefits than costs, it's more perceived benefits versus perceived costs. And to do all this, that's where it comes into the customer journey. We have to really start to think about how we manage that customer journey in a way that we can do it efficiently from our side, so we don't have to charge too much money to that customer, but then also make sure that we're effective. And so this kind of drives us to the point now that it's not necessarily, the brand experience as much as it is this customer journey experience. And we go into what I would refer to as our fourth distribution flow. So we already know from the distribution approach to marketing exchange that we have the flow of information, we have the flow of product innovation, we have the flow of compensation and all the transaction costs. But now we can really start to think of this idea of the flow of customers as they go through their respective journeys, and how we don't manage only the flow of information, innovation, and compensation, but now we have to manage the flow of these customers. And so we have to make sure we take care of those interactions or touch points. We have to take care of where they're going, the pathways. And then we also have to make sure we manage as much as we can the customer decision making. And so that means that those pathways that they take are going to be based on the decisions that those customers make. Do I go to the left? Do I go to the right? Do I shop online, or do I call on the phone, or do I walk in the store in person? Do I go on a weekend, or do I go on a weekday in the evening after work? All of these decisions that customers make we can have an influence on how they do that. And influence is not necessarily through advertising, but through other types of communication, through how we set up our own experience. Are we open early in the morning? Are we open late at night? Are we open when the traffic is flowing in a certain direction and closed when it's flowing in another direction? What we do and how we design these journeys and experiences can drive our customers, literally drive them through or push them through a particular flow where they will be in the right place and the right time with the right attitude, with all the right conditions that will give them a positive customer experience. And this customer decision making can be an experience in itself. The experience of making a decision can be a very positive experience, or it can be a negative experience. And even down to the point of micro decisions, the smallest little thing, the decision to stop for just a moment and look at that Instagram ad, the decision to click here or to click there. All these small decisions are still decisions that will help the customer in a particular path, a particular journey, and at the same time, there'll be an experience that goes along with this. So, with all this then, you get to the point where you start to look at it and understand that you need to manage the flows and processes, right? So all flow of information, innovation, compensation, and customer through their journey. We have to manage the decisions, and which will affect the pathways. We have to manage all the touch points, making sure that every time that we have that touch point, that as much as possible, it's going to be a positive experience, but not just a positive one, but one that will continue to help the customer to move to the next decision, to move through the path that we feel will be best for this customer, the one that will make this customer feel better. Why? Because we want them to feel better, because we care about them. We know them, we've talked with them, we've communicated, we have empathy, and we care. We want them to actually have a very positive experience. Will that help our company? Of course it will. But it'll help them as well. And we also have to manage the people. We have to manage, number 4, the people, both the customers plus our employees, plus all the other people out there, those influencers, those recommenders, those others that are out there. So there's a lot for us to manage as marketers, a lot more than us just tossing up some ads somewhere. And truthfully, this should be a team in a larger organization that focuses in on the customer experience and focuses in on how to manage this and manage all of those, the flows, the decisions, the touch points, and the people. So I hope through all this, you've had at least a different perspective on this. I know you've all heard customer experience before, you've heard these things, but just to get a different perspective so that you can now think in a different way, even as you're developing your ads and your campaigns, think of where you want them to go. How are you going to have your customers flow? Are they going to go from that search ad to your landing page where they'll then watch your video and you'll have a call to action that will make them click on something to get onto your email list, perhaps? But what about the other path? Someone coming from a different path that says, well, is that going to come to the same landing page? Will you make a different landing page for those people that come from a different ad? You can do that. You can have one ad landing page for one ad, another landing page for another ad, and then let them converge later on. So how you design this will have an impact on what your customers do, because you're trying to design a flow that kind of pulls them through the right way so that they're happy, and in the end you're happy, because hopefully you've made a perceived mutually beneficial exchange relationship that will help that customer have a great experience, and you'll have a great experience, and you'll both want to have more exchanges in the future.